welcome to Property Question Time. I'm your host, Taylor Welch. This is the show where you get to ask your property-related questions to our panel of industry experts. I'm joined today by Gary Pierce, founder of Pure Funding, Heather Kingston, realtor of the Cates Group, and Jerry Allen of Keller Williams Brazos West. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Our first question is about financing for Gary, and the question reads, how long after purchasing a home can I refinance it in a bid to get a better deal?
All right, so it's depending on the type of loan you have, certain loans require a seasoning period. So for instance, an FHA loan, if you take an FHA loan out, the government requires you to at least stay in that home for 210 days post-funding. So you can't sell it or you can't refinance until that seasoning period has expired. A conventional loan, on the other hand, you can essentially do whatever you want. You can refinance the day after. I don't advise that because of the fees that would be associated to both of the closings. There's really, you would have to have a substantial market movement to want to refinance, especially now you may want to sell a property or you may want to pay it off. But there is no seasoning requirements on a conventional financing loan.
What about a down payment assistance?
Down payment assistance is going to still have, because it's going to be through an FHA product, so they're still going to have a seasoning requirement.
So there's a lender down where I live, and they do when they do their conventional loans, they'll do like 20-25% down, and they have a 5-year balloon note. So it's like, that doesn't really make sense. But so 2 years into that, it would probably make sense to refinance into some other kind of note, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it depending on the client. If the cash is, if they did the deal assuming they were going to have the cash in 5 years, if they're going to do a balloon payment, likely they're going to want to stretch that out. And so, assuming they didn't have the cash or they want to use their own cash for something else, then you could refinance out of that. Some of those balloon payments can come with a prepayment penalty, but any conventional loan is not going to have a prepayment penalty associated to it.
Thank you. Our next question is on the subject of farm and ranch assets for Heather. Our question reads, if a farm or ranch is bought with its machinery or equipment as part of the transaction, what recourse is there if the machinery isn't fully serviceable?
Well, if you're buying a farm and ranch and tractors and mulchers and brush hogs and things like that are all conveying, and the buyer's putting some value on those things, they probably should make sure that those things are working prior to close. All of those things could be inspected, I suppose. You could have a mechanic come out, or you could, work with the seller and have him show you, that all of those things are in good working order. You could ask the seller for, his service records, like is he changing the oil on these things? Is he doing the things that he should be to make sure that they're in a good, position on closing? Now, once you sign the paperwork and the property has funded, they are the property of the buyer. So if 2 days after closing, your brush hog breaks down and you cannot mow your property, the seller's out. It is the property of the buyer. So any change or any maintenance or any sort of repairs on those implements would have to be on the buyer. They can't go back to the seller and say, hey, this brush hog doesn't work. Because remember, everything that you do is a snapshot of what is happening that day, right? Your air conditioning, it's the same thing with your entire house. Air conditioning might work great during the inspection. 2 weeks after closing, it could break. I mean, that is just houses, all systems, all require maintenance at all times. So once the buyer owns it, the buyer's responsible for it.
Get that warranty.
Home warranty is a good thing to have for sure.
Thank you, Heather. Our next question is about gated communities for Jerry. And the question reads, there are more and more gated communities springing up for off-plan sales. How is it possible to be sure that they are properly serviced, and is it possible to specify that, especially if new pipes are being laid for water?
It's a little tricky, but not so bad. There's a lot of legislation that goes into it, and a lot of paperwork that has to be done ahead of time. You can go to, if it's in the city limits, you can go to your city's Planning and Zoning Commission. They'll have every kind of plan for everything at every layer and every level, so that you can inspect that and you can get that from them. If it's a gated community, they're required to file with the state. These are our restrictions, these are our development plans, these are the reserves that we have in place to cover the expenses of all these different things. So there's no way that you can walk in and not be aware of any of that stuff. So you can go ahead and look at it with your lawyer, preferably, or with your realtor or with your title company, and say, hey, if I have a specific question about pipes or anything like that, what can you tell me from this? And it's there. And you can actually physically go out to the place and inspect it and see what they're doing. Some of them are pre-selling years out. And so you really have to rely on the paperwork there. But they have the paperwork and the plans, and they're very specific. So it's actually pretty easy to do it. It's a lot easier to do it with a property that doesn't exist yet than one that already existed. And say, for instance, in the instance we were talking about a couple of episodes ago, where the people had the farm forever, and then you come out and find out later on that it's actually another acre or two over from where it was. So it's a lot easier to find out with the new properties. But you should do your due diligence on it.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. As a follow-up question, if they're selling properties a few years out, what risks are there for the buyer?
Well, there's always a risk of, because with economic conditions being like what they have in the last 2 years, we never know if there's going to be a pandemic or anything of that nature. But that's why you put down earnest money as a deposit. So the deposit is kept by a title company. The title company holds that until the completion of the project, and then you can come and pay for the completion of the project. So you do have that in place. The title company is not going to go bankrupt. The state won't let them. If a title company does go bankrupt, the state takes all of the funds that were already there with them, or another title company takes them over. So there's very little risk as far as that goes. But it is buyer beware. You have to look at your contract. You have to make sure. There are a couple places in a couple of different counties, like you were saying, Johnson County is different than Parker County, is different than Palapino County, is different than Erath or Hood County. If you're in the city, it's going to be pretty consistent. But if you're out in the county, then they're subject to fewer restrictions, if you would. Texas is pretty specific about the things that you have to do in order to be able to be developing and taking money for developments. So they try to protect the buyers, and of course, the developer also wants to protect the buyer, but they're trying to develop it and they want as much money, as much assurance as they can to be able to get it. A lot of people go ahead and put a property under contract and they'll have their earnest money there, and then they may back out because it's just not going along quick enough. That's a risk that the builder has to take.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Our next question is open for discussion amongst the panel, and the question is, why is an appraisal necessary, and how does it affect the sale of a property?
Well, from a lending perspective, any lender that's going to lend on a property wants to have a valid kind of third-party view of what the property value actually is. Obviously, within an appraisal, there's a lot more to it. You get a lot of information. You get a lot of different comps. You get conditions of certain aspects of the home. You also, depending on the kind of loan, you will have a different required appraisal. So FHA and VA are different than a conventional loan. So an FHA loan is going to be much more strict. It's going to impact the moving forward in the loan process. There's likely to be, if there's paint chips on the outside, or if there's if it doesn't have gutters in certain areas, it's a requirement of FHA. We just did one last month that the sellers had to put a gutter in the back of the house. So they're super important. They can be very frustrating at times for all of us, and they can be very advantageous depending on the outcome of the value. So, but any lender is going to require and need that to make sure that the piece of property that they're lending against has got a proper value and they know what the value is going in at that point.
And this is another part that we have to work negotiating together to get the deal done. And sometimes if it's catastrophically low, there's just really not much you can do to save the deal. Because if a house, let's say the property is valued at 500 and the person is putting down 20%, right? So if the property is appraised for 500, we have no issues. It's great. Everything moves forward. Everyone's happy. If it appraises higher, the buyers are even happier because they're walking into equity. If it appraises at 400,000, we have a big problem. If it appraises even $5,000 low with an FHA or VA appraisal, technically the buyers could walk from the deal. The seller does not have to renegotiate the sales price. They don't have to. It really is up to the buyer and the seller to work out a middle ground. Usually is what we try to do, is kind of meet in the middle to where both parties are comfortable, because a low appraisal hurts everybody. It hurts every single person.
Right. On behalf of the appraisers, there's 165,000 active realtors in Texas. There's 6,000 appraisers. So you can imagine the amount of work they have to, and it's a decreasing number. So there's a lot of pressure on the appraisers to go ahead and get the works done and everything. And they are good. They're held to a very high standard. They have a lot of training. But we've all seen appraisals that we're like, wow. I mean, I'm not an appraiser, but they may not either be. A house is really worth, if it's being financed, a house is worth whatever the bank's going to loan on it. The bank's going to loan whatever it's appraised for. If it comes out different, the seller's either going to have to come down, or the buyer's going to have to come up, or they'll have to work out, like you were saying, we have to work out something in the middle. Ideally, that's our job. We say, okay, well, what about this? We move a couple of parts around and try to make the deal happen so that everybody's a win, because we want it to be a win-win for everybody. And he wants it to be a win-win for everybody, because otherwise he doesn't get to write the loan. But the bottom line is we want to go ahead and get either our seller the house sold for the price that he can live with, and the buyers the house that they can live with at the price that they want.
Thank you for your answers. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after the break to answer more of your property-related questions.
Howdy folks, I'm Jerry Allen, Global Realtor with Keller Williams Brazos West. I am your go-to guy for all things real estate. Whether you're looking for a piece of land or a large ranch, first home, next home, dream home, or your last home, I can guide you through the process till we find what you want. It's service like that that's kept me a top area producer for many years now. For more information, visit me online. Remember the name, Jerry Allen. Let's fulfill your next dream together.
Hi, I'm Gary Pierce with Pure Funding. We're proud to serve Texas and, more importantly, Parker County as your go-to residential and farm and ranch mortgage broker.
That's right. I'm Willis Richardson, and with our passion, products, and process, we'll get you to the closing table on time.
Give us a call or come by and see us. We're located right off the historic square in downtown Weatherford.
Or you can visit us first at our website at www.mypurefunding.com.
Hi, I'm Heather Kingston. Showing land on these ranches that we have out here in Parker County is one of my most favorite things to do. Come on, let's go take a ride. When choosing a buyer's agent, you have to have someone who has geographical competence and a vast knowledge of the area that you were choosing to purchase in. As a listing agent, my focus is to net the most for my sellers with the least amount of risk. That's such an important part of my job. And with a background of photography and videography, I bring everything to the table that we need to market your property to the best of our abilities.
Welcome back to Property Question Time. I'm your host, Taylor Welch. Today I'm joined by Gary Pierce, founder of Pure Funding, Heather Kingston, realtor of the Cates Group, and Jerry Allen of Keller Williams Brazos West. Thank you all for being with us here today.
Thank you.
This question goes to Gary for buy down points. And the question reads, what are, quote, buy down points and when are they utilized?
So the term buy down is a pretty straightforward number when it relates to loans. So when you think about a loan, there's not really a zero cost for a loan. There's either a cost for a rate. So let's say at 7%, you might have to pay $150 in points to get that, and a point is 1% of the loan, so it would be a fraction of that number. If you were at a little bit higher rate, 7 1/8, let's say, you might get a lender credit of, say, $1,500. So a lot of folks like to use money to buy down that rate, and so you might go from 7 down to, let's say, 6.5, and that might cost you 1 point. In terms of a $300,000 loan, or $300,000 loan, that's $3,000 to get to that rate. So this environment, it's been really tricky. So we've been using what they call a 2-to-1 buy down. So what that allows buyers to do is work with the seller to get a seller concession or a seller credit to buy their rate down. And what a 2-to-1 buy down does is it takes the rate from 7% in the first year down to 5%. Okay, so they save that money. So the difference in that rate, it might be $400 a month lower. So what we do is we take that $400 a month and we multiply it times 12, and that gives us our $4,800. And then we do the same thing in the second year. And so if the difference is $200, we add that up over 12 months, and then we get the combined number to get us the buy down rate or the seller credit that we need to buy that rate down and get the 2-to-1 buy down. And it's been a really popular tool here over the last, 6 months or so. It's been around for years, but we really didn't need it when we were selling, 2.75 rates. Today we're at, 7 and change, 7 1/4, and so it's a really great tool for folks to get that were on the sidelines to get back in to the market at this point. So it's a really good tool to get that lower payment in that first year or two.
Can I ask, does the credit for that buy down have to come from the seller? Or can a buyer choose to prepay it?
So the buyer can't. It can only come from the. There's a builder, real estate agent. So you can use your proceeds towards it, and then the seller. Those are the three. So the buyer can't actually do that. One real cool caveat to that is that. So let's say there's $10,000 added to the deal as a seller concession. That $10,000 gets, if the client decides, if rates go down in the next year and they refinance, that escrow account goes back to that. So that's their money. So they get that back. So that's a pretty cool part of that 2-1 buy down. So you're actually getting that back at the time. Hopefully rates will go down and then you get that money to come back to you as well. So it's a cool product.
Okay, thank you, Gary.
You're welcome.
Our next question is for Heather, and the question reads, what kind of costs are involved in marketing a property?
All right, well, as a listing agent, I am actually very lucky because I actually got into real estate because of my photography, videography background. So I was a professional photographer for 20 years. I started shooting more real estate, more and more real estate, because with, traditional photography, you have busy seasons and very, very slow seasons. But, real estate was a great supplement to my family's income during the slow periods. It didn't seem to slow down too much. So luckily for me, I don't have any costs because I do it all myself. However, the normal realtor does not have a background in photography and videography. So, essentially, there's a lot of startup costs, especially for a brand new realtor. You've got, to purchase your sign to put in the front yard. That's a marketing tool technically. Those are probably about $200 bucks a piece or so. You've got a blue box that we put on the front door to protect our clients, to make sure that the people entering the home are, licensed realtors. Only licensed realtors can open those blue boxes. Those are about $110, 150 bucks. The photos depend. It depends on who you purchase or who you buy. And I would, from my background, I would say you get what you pay for. Mm-hmm. So do not take phone photos, do not, don't go for the cheapest, because, with the cheapest, you're not going to be getting high definition images where, the photographer's taking 5 different stills and then knitting them together to make a true high definition image. That is really what you need to do, really. So those probably cost anywhere from $200 to $300, depending on how many images and how much time it takes. And then for farms and ranches, you've got the drone photography and drone videography, and typically I see other photo agencies charging probably about $150 as an add-on,
right,
which I think is insane because it takes 5 minutes to take a drone up and to take a few shots. So I think that they're really overcharging for those, but they're so necessary. And then, if you do marketing pieces, you might have to pay a marketing gal to put together a marketing packet for your property, and that, is an additional several $100s. So it certainly adds up, and it's difficult for us because we are fronting all of that up front. So we don't get, paid back for those items if the property doesn't sell. That's a risk that we have to take as a listing agent, that we are investing all of this time and money into this property. We are working really hard for our sellers to market the property and pay for the absolute best so that we can get top dollar back for our sellers. So it's super important and expensive, and we get, paid back once the property sells. If the property expires or is canceled, if the seller changes their mind, you can write into your listing agreement that you can be reimbursed for those items. I don't know if people do. I don't, because, for me it's just time and my skill. But some people do definitely write that in, because if someone just changes their mind and you've spent $2,000 marketing their property, it's a big deal for us. So.
It really is. And then too, you're building your brand. That costs money. Those are costs that people don't see. You go ahead and you go to your GRI or your CE classes. You specialize in certain things and you take all those classes. That's not something you get paid for directly. You pay for it. It becomes part of your professional portfolio, but that helps you to be a better realtor for your clients. And they may not see all of that. If you have alphabet after your name, it's like, okay, that's great. You've got a whole bunch of letters after your name. They really don't know that. Other realtors do. And sometimes when you're making an offer to buy a house for your client, they want to know who you are. So they Google you and they go, okay, this person knows what they're doing. They've had some skin in the game. They care about knowing what's going on. You get a little bit of extra credibility for having those type of things, classes you've been to, houses you've sold, but you can't skimp on pictures. That's the first thing everybody sees. If I don't care if you've got a really nice Samsung Galaxy Fold whatever with a great camera. They are great and everything, but I'm not a great photographer like she is. So I pay somebody that is, just like plumbing. I'm not going to do my own plumbing. I'm going to pay somebody that knows what they're doing. And that's the first thing everybody sees is the photos on the web. That's what's going to get them to come out and see that house. So spend the extra money there. If you want to skimp on snacks at an open house, yeah, go ahead and do that. That's another expense that we have, open houses. We do broker opens. Those are open houses for other realtors that may never have seen this house, houses that have never been put on the market before. These people come in and they look at it and they go, okay, great, I have a client that wants to buy this house. Those are really efficient. But most of the time, you just winds up, you give gift cards to some of these people. But then you have open houses to the public, and the public comes in there and they want little snacks and water and stuff like that, and you pay somebody to do that. Those are things that people don't see as expenses. They think that's fun. It is fun. If you enjoy doing it, it's all fun. But it is an expense, and it does cost money. I wish the sellers could see ahead of time what we have already done for them that they don't know.
Thank you for your answers. Our next question is for Jerry, and the question is to please explain ag exemption.
As we talked about earlier, that's a tough one. First off, we'll talk about exemptions. Okay, you're going to find about those from your county appraisal district. The most important one that everybody is entitled to is the homestead exemption on the house that you live in. And it used to be you had to wait for a whole year to get that. But now you don't have to. As soon as you buy the property and get your license changed, you can go get your homestead exemption done immediately. And you want to do that because that's at least 10 to 15% reduction in the appraisal tax. And then you can also get a veteran exemption if you're a veteran, or if you're a disabled veteran, you can get that. If you're over 65, you can get a senior exemption. And the nice thing about the senior exemption is that will lock in all your exemptions, except for the ag one. That one still has to be qualified for. The ag exemption is one that is designed for people that have basically a farm and ranch, or a farm, or a property that qualifies for agricultural use. Qualifying for agricultural use, there's a lot of different if, ands, and buts, and it depends on what kind of agricultural use you have. If you're raising cattle, they allow you a certain amount of land to be able to graze on and say, okay, fine, if you have 10 head of cattle, you have to have at least 5 acres or 10 acres. I think the minimum is 10 acres to be able to get the exemption. But as we discussed earlier, if you can prove the use that you're having, you can get an exemption on a smaller one, but you have to go to the county to do that. Then it has to be, if the property's never had one, you have to use it for agriculture for, was it 2 out of 5 years?
5 out of 7.
5 out of 7 years. So it's 7 years down the road. You have to prove that you actually plan on doing something agriculture with that, and you're not just going, yeah, I've got a farm and I want an exemption. Doesn't work that way, guys, sorry.
Keep receipts and take pictures.
Yep.
They're going to want to see all of that to prove that ag use for the past 7 years. Anything you do, right? Fencing,
right.
Buying a tractor, all of that stuff.
Pins, all of that.
Yep.
And if you're buying a property that already has it, you just have to continue that type of use, and you have to apply, because it doesn't automatically transfer. You have to apply with the district when you go ahead and you're the new owner of the property. You say, yes, I want to apply for that, and they'll send somebody out and go, okay, you're doing the same thing they did. We'll continue that exemption. You're okay. It's substantial. It says it will bring your property taxes down to about 10% of what they would be at the low end.
Pennies on the dollar for the land.
Yep.
And typically you only ag exempt the land portion.
Mm-hmm.
The house and the improvements are separated onto a different parcel. Mm-hmm. And then the land that is used for agricultural production is going to be on a separate parcel. So where that land might be taxed at, $15,000 for that land, once you have that ag exemption, it could be in place for $150. I mean, it's huge.
Way cheap.
And that's why it's so difficult, because the state of Texas wants their tax dollars, their tax revenue. So they do make it very difficult to get it and to keep it.
But they want you to be a farmer.
That's right.
Thank you both. Our next question is open for discussion amongst the panel. The subject is properties as a legacy, and the question reads, more and more, we seem to be encouraged to pass our assets down to our children while we are still alive. Why is this, and is it relevant to the property we live in too?
As I'm the older one here, probably, my kids, if I went ahead and gave my property to my son or my sons, and then they give me in turn what's called a life estate that says, Dad, you can live there as long as you live, I can go ahead and deed that to them. And they don't have to pay taxes on it. Well, they don't have to pay capital gains taxes on it until I die and they sell it or do whatever they do with it. The taxes are still due on the property, but I get to stay there and live until I die. They can't sell it. I can sell it. They get the property, they get the proceeds, but they can't sell it out from under me. So it allows me to know that I have a place to live, or my wife and I have a place to live for as long as we live, and that it's already taken care of. Once we die, it immediately goes to them. That you don't need a will for that. It's already done. That makes it real simple. And then it does since they are actually the owners of the property, it would put them probably in a different tax bracket because if they're only going to you're allowed to make up to $250,000 on a property that you own. Well, it has to be your primary residence, but still, if each of them only has, like, say it's $1 million house, they've got $250,000 on each part of it. They only have to pay tax on that part of it that they own. So it can be a really good thing. For me, it's great because I get to live there and not get kicked out, and they get something, and I don't have to worry about it going through court to get to them.
Thank you. Sadly, that's all the time we have for today, but please keep your questions coming. You can send those in via our website, PAX180.com, or by emailing pqt@paxtelevision.com. My special thanks today goes to our panel of industry experts. Thank you three for being here once again.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you again,
Thanks,
Taylor.
Taylor.
Appreciate it.
And thank you for watching Property Question Time with me, Taylor Welch, and we'll see you next time.